My husband, the master deceiver, how I unveiled his double life and forged my own path to freedom. The iPad had fallen from my trembling hands, its screen dark now, but the damning evidence was seared into my mind, a brand upon my soul. My initial paralysis, that suffocating blanket of shock, had receded, giving way to a chilling clarity. I would not be a passive victim in the wreckage of my marriage, no. The first step, understanding the enemy of my enemy, and understanding the full rotten scope of Marcus's betrayal. Fueled by a cocktail of adrenaline and an icy rage I barely recognized as my own, I snatched up the device again. My fingers, surprisingly steady, flew across the screen, delving deeper into the abyss of Marcus Thorne's secret life. It was worse than I could have imagined. Months, possibly years of messages scrolled before my eyes, a lurid tapestry woven with stolen weekends, explicit photographs and whispered promises. There was Marcus grinning with a carefree abandon I hadn't seen in our own home for what felt like an eternity. And there was Isabel Vance, his assistant, the woman I'd met only once, her laugh now echoing in my memory with a sinister undertone. In several photos, she wore that antique locket with its strange, unidentifiable symbol, a detail that pricked at the edges of my consciousness, a tiny dissonant note in the cacophony of betrayal. Receipts from the Onyx Hotel in Silver Peak, a place he'd claimed was for a grueling strategy summit. Whispers of clandestine meetings at the Moonshadow Resort, a place I knew they'd never been together. Not us, anyway. Their plans for a future meticulously laid out, a future that pointedly, painfully did not include me. Each new discovery was a fresh stab to my already bleeding heart. But with each stab, the grief that threatened to drown me was slowly, surely being shouldered aside by a methodical, almost surgical anger. This wasn't just a fling. This was a calculated dismantling of our life, our vows, everything I held sacred. I became a machine of evidence gathering. Screenshots, hundreds of them. Every incriminating message, every damning photo, every suggestive emoji. I forwarded critical emails, hotel confirmations, flight itineraries for two to a newly created anonymous email account. A digital trail of their duplicity, a cold, hard path leading straight to the truth. The name Isabel Vance was a constant. Her social media profile, carelessly linked within their toxic exchanges, was laughably public. And there, beaming beside her in a sun-drenched beach photo, was a man whose smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Liam Jacoby, her fiancé. The poor, unsuspecting fool. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Finding his professional profile, his work email, was child's play after the depths I'd already plumbed. But composing the message to him, that was an exercise in controlled devastation. How do you tell a stranger their life is also a carefully constructed lie? How do you deliver a blow you know will shatter them, even as you're still piecing together your own broken shards? I typed, deleted, retyped. My breath hitched. Finally, the words formed stark and brutal. My name is Alara Thorne. I'm Marcus Thorne's wife. I believe your fiancée, Isabel Vance, is having an affair with my husband. I have proof. Tonight, they plan to be at her bachelorette party at the Crystal Swan Ballroom. He's the surprise. I hit send before doubt could cripple me. The reply came in under 5 minutes. Swift. Just 3 words that screamed of shock and dawning horror. Call me now. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dialed his number. His voice when he answered was tight strained. Liam Jacoby speaking. Liam, it's Alara Thorne. Silence. Then the email. Is this some kind of sick joke? I wish it were. I said, my own voice surprisingly calmed the eye of my personal storm. And then I laid it all out. The messages, the photos, the planned trysts, the web of lies Marcus and Isabel had spun around us both. I could hear his breath catching the sharp inhales of a man drowning in disbelief. He was quiet for a long moment, the silence stretching, filled only by the crackle of the connection and my own ragged breathing. When he finally spoke, the disbelief had fractured, replaced by a raw guttural pain that resonated deep within my own wounded core. The Moonshadow Resort, he choked out. We were supposed to be married there. Next month. The words hung between us, a shared monument to our separate, intertwined betrayals. The pain in his voice then hardened, chilling into a cold fury that mirrored my own. An alliance unspoken but undeniable was forged in that moment of shared agony. My parents, he said, his voice now low and dangerous. Alistair and Eleanor Jacoby. They're in town for the pre-wedding events. staying at the Starlight Inn. They'll want to know, they'll want to come. He didn't ask, he stated. And I understood. This wasn't just about us anymore. It was about families, about honor, about exposing the full extent of the deceit. The Crystal Swan Ballroom, I confirmed, tonight. We'll be there, he said, a grim certainty in his tone. Before we hung up, I hesitated. Liam, one more thing. In some of the pictures, Isabel is wearing a distinctive locket, antique looking with a strange symbol. Do you recognize it? A pause. No, he said, a note of confusion in his voice. No, I've never seen it before. Another dead end. Or perhaps another thread in a tapestry far more complex and sinister than I could yet comprehend. The locket. It was a minor detail, yet it snagged at my thoughts, an unsettling whisper beneath the roar of imminent confrontation. The unlikely alliance was cemented. As I disconnected the call, the path ahead, though fraught with peril and certain pain, was terrifyingly clear. We were going to the Crystal Swan Ballroom, and the charade was about to end. The digital trail had led me to an ally, and together we were about to walk into the fire. The silence in the car was a living thing, thick and suffocating, pressing down on the four of us as we drove towards the Crystal Swan Ballroom. An unlikely quartet of retribution meet Alara, a wife, scorned beyond measure. Liam Jacoby, the man whose dreams were being systematically dismantled with every mile we covered. And his parents, Alistair and Eleanor, their faces carved from stone, their presence a bulwark of grim support. Every so often, the quiet would be punctuated by the soft swipe of Liam's finger across his phone screen as I, sitting beside him, continued to share the damning digital trail I'd uncovered. More messages, more photos. The sheer volume of Marcus and Isabel's deceit was staggering. Each new piece of evidence another nail in the coffin of Liam's love and my marriage. He'd gone pale, a muscle twitching in his jaw, but his eyes, when they met mine, held a new, hard light. The soft, trusting man from the beach photo was gone, replaced by someone navigating the jagged edges of an unbearable truth. Beside me, Eleanor Jacoby was a study in stoic fury. Her hands, elegant and ringed, clutched a string of ivory pearls at her throat, a stark contrast to the tempest brewing in her eyes. She hadn't said much since we'd left the Starlight Inn, where Liam had broken the news, but her silence was more eloquent than any outburst. It spoke of a mother's pain, of a deeply ingrained sense of propriety violated. A silent promise of reckoning. Alistair Jacoby from the passenger seat finally broke the oppressive quiet. His voice, when he spoke, was gravelly, accustomed to command. He turned his sharp, assessing gaze fixing on me. What do you want from this young lady? He asked the question devoid of judgment, merely seeking a clear objective. I met his gaze without flinching, the words I'd rehearsed in my head now feeling like the only anchor in a churning sea. The truth, Mr. Jacoby. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Undiluted, so no one can ever twist it again. Not for him, not for her, not for anyone. He gave a curt nod, a flicker of something akin to respect in his eyes before he turned back to face the road. Truth has a price. He murmured more to himself than to us. Yes, I thought, and I was prepared to pay it. We all were. Liam beside me let out a shuddering breath. I could almost see the war raging within him. The love he'd felt for Isabel, a love he'd been nurturing towards a wedding altar, now battling the sickening, undeniable evidence of her betrayal. His hand clenched into a fist on his lap, knuckles white. How does one reconcile the image of a beloved partner with the grotesque reality of their deception? I knew that battle. I was still fighting it. My own mind kept replaying scenes from my 12 years with Marcus. Small, seemingly insignificant lies, moments of unease I'd dismissed, now resurfaced, cast in a sinister new light. That urgent business trip to Silver Peak last spring, the one where he'd come back exhausted but strangely exhilarated. The dates matched perfectly with a receipt from the Onyx Hotel, a photograph of Isabel tagged at a rooftop bar, nearby Marcus's reflection barely visible in the window behind her, smiling that secret smile. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud, forming a mosaic of calculated deceit. Each memory was a fresh twist of the knife. My God, how had I been so blind, or had I simply chosen not to see? The question was a torment. The atmosphere in the car grew heavier with each passing minute, thick with unspoken grief and a shared grim determination. I watched the Jacobys in the rearview mirror. Eleanor's quiet dignity was a fortress, though I saw the tremor in her hands as she adjusted her pearls. Alistair's protective anger for his son was a palpable force, a silent vow that this would not go unanswered. They were good people caught in the crossfire of a sordid affair they had no part in creating. My heart ached for them for Liam. And then we were there. The Crystal Swan Ballroom. It rose before us, an edifice of glittering, opulent vulgarity, thumping bass vibrating through the pavement shouts of manufactured joy and shrill laughter spilling out onto the manicured lawns. The contrast between the grim silence in our car and the raucous revelry within was a physical blow, like stepping from a funeral into a carnival. My stomach churned. This was where my husband was at this very moment, preparing to perform for her, for them. I took a deep, shuddering breath, a strange, dangerous calm settling over me. This was it, the point of no return. As we pulled up to the entrance, I saw it, a ridiculously large, glittering sign propped on an easel, Isabel's final fling. The irony was a bitter acid in my throat. Her final fling before marrying Liam, or her final fling before eloping with Marcus. Did it even matter anymore? Liam looked physically ill, his face ashen. He swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on that garish sign. But when he turned to me, there was a flicker of the same steely resolve I felt hardening my own spine. He nodded, a single jerky movement. Ready. The image of Isabel's locket, that strange, unidentifiable symbol, flashed in my mind again. Would she be wearing it tonight? A trivial thought perhaps amidst the wreckage, yet it snagged a loose thread I couldn't quite dismiss. I met Liam's gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between us, a shared understanding of the abyss we were about to step into. Ready? I murmured, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded again, his jaw tight, his eyes mirroring the grim determination in my own. Let's go. Together we pushed open the grand, ornate doors of the Crystal Swan Ballroom, stepping out of the night and into the glaring, deceptive heart of the charade. The music was a mocking soundtrack to our mission. There was no turning back now. The heavy ballroom doors of the Crystal Swan swung inward with a momentum that felt preordained, as if the universe itself was impatient for the charade to end. We stepped inside, Liam and I, leading his parents, a formidable presence behind us. The music, some thumping generic dance track, choked mid-beat the sudden silence, a physical shock that rippled through the room. What felt like 100 pairs of eyes belonging to at least 20 women in an assortment of sparkly too-tight dresses swiveled towards us, their painted smiles freezing then faltering. And there in the center of the room, bathed in the lurid glow of flickering purple and pink spotlights, was my husband, Marcus Thorne, shirtless. One side of his cheap tearaway trousers already ripped down, revealing a glimpse of garish boxer shorts beneath. A crooked, pathetic black bow tie clung to his neck. He was mid-gyration, a grotesque parody of seduction, his face contorted into a leer meant to be playful, but now just looked lewd. A deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming train doesn't begin to cover the expression that slammed onto his face as he saw us. Raw, unadulterated shock followed by a dawning, sickening horror. Across the room, directly in his line of sight, stood Isabel Vance, the bride-to-be, less than 3 weeks from walking down the aisle. She had a champagne flute raised high, a triumphant, slightly tipsy grin plastered on her face. That grin dissolved as if doused with acid the second her eyes locked onto Liam. Then her gaze flickered to me, standing beside him, and the color drained from her face, leaving it a ghastly, mottled white. For 5 eternal seconds, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint, insistent throb of the silenced bass, a phantom heartbeat in the suddenly tomb-like room. Then Eleanor Jacoby's voice, sharp as a shard of ice, cut through the silence. Isabel Vance. She enunciated each syllable, dripping with contempt. What precisely is the meaning of this debauchery? The champagne flute slipped from Isabel's nerveless fingers. It shattered on the polished dance floor, the sound clean final, like the breaking of a spell, or the ending of a story no one had ever wanted to hear. Splinters of glass skittered across the floor like scattered diamonds. Ben Liam. Isabel gasped, her eyes wide and wild, darting between him and the spectacle of Marcus. It's not what it looks like. A classic. The most pathetic, overused line in the history of infidelity. Did she really think that would work? Liam didn't move towards her. He didn't need to. He simply held up his phone, the screen lit angled so the entire room could see the damning messages, the intimate photos I had painstakingly forwarded to him. A collective gasp, a ripple of horrified whispers spread through the assembled women. A few of them, the ones closest to the door, began to back away, clutching their purses, their eyes darting nervously between the unfolding drama and their own phones, perhaps wondering what digital betrayals their own lives might hold. I stepped forward, then my legs feeling strangely steady, my heart a cold, hard knot in my chest. I didn't look at Marcus, not yet. My focus was entirely on Isabel. My voice, when I spoke, was calm, devoid of hysterics, yet it carried an immense weight cutting through every other sound in that suddenly silent room. You've been sleeping with my husband, Marcus Thorne, for over a year, Isabel. I stated, letting the words hang in the air. You've been lying to your fiancé, the man whose ring you wear, whose family welcomed you, and tonight, while claiming this was your bachelorette party, your celebration of impending marriage, you hired my husband to be your surprise spectacle. I let my gaze sweep over Marcus's pathetic, half-naked form. How long exactly were you planning to keep this degrading act going? I saw her swallow, her throat working. She opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. I have everything. I continued, my voice relentless. The explicit messages you exchanged, the photos from your tryst at the Onyx Hotel in Silver Peak, the one Marcus told me was a critical business merger he couldn't miss, the detailed plans you made for your romantic escape after your wedding, to Liam, the life you were going to build on the ashes of two broken marriages, the messages where you called Marcus your soulmate. I paused. Ring any bells, Isabel? Marcus took a hesitant step back, his mouth opening slightly as if to speak, to offer some defense, some pathetic excuse. I turned my head just enough to acknowledge his existence, then dismissed him with a glance. He wasn't my priority. Not yet. Liam finally moved, stepping a little closer to Isabel, his face a mask of agony. I picked out our wedding china, Isabel. He said, his voice cracking with a pain that tore at my own heart. I spent hours agonizing over the floral arrangements, the guest list, your father's tuxedo, while you were picking out hotel rooms with him. His voice broke on the last word, and a woman in a sea green bridesmaid dress standing near Isabel actually flinched. It was then, in the periphery of my vision, that I noticed it. Curiosity element number 2. A guest. A woman I didn't recognize, sitting alone at a small table in a dimly lit corner, slightly apart from the main bridal party. She wasn't gasping or whispering like the others. She was holding her phone up, not in the casual way one might snap a party photo, but steadily, deliberately filming the entire exchange. Her expression was unreadable, a blank canvas in the swirling chaos of the room. Who was she, and why was she documenting this public humiliation with such detached focus? The thought was a fleeting distraction, quickly submerged by the urgent tide of the confrontation. I turned my attention back to Marcus, who still stood frozen, a ridiculous statue of shame. And you, Marcus? I said, my voice now laced with the ice that had been forming around my heart for hours. Remember that urgent trip you took last March? Your brother's supposed emergency surgery in another state, the one that kept you away from my own mother's milestone birthday celebration, despite the whole family waiting for you. He blinked rapidly, his mind clearly scrambling. I have the hotel receipt from the Grand Viridian Hotel for that weekend, Marcus. A suite for 2. Booked under your name, paid for with our joint account. Funny how your brother's recovery coincided so perfectly with a luxury getaway for you and Isabel, isn't it? His face, if possible, grew even paler. And then there's Clara Hayes. I continued, relentless. The name dropped into the silence like a stone into a deep well. I saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes then. Good. You told me things with Clara didn't work out because she was too ambitious, not ready to commit. A convenient narrative. But Clara tells a different story, Marcus. A story about a man who professed his undying love, who was on the verge of proposing, and then vanished, ghosted her completely just weeks after meeting me at that corporate seminar. It seems I wasn't your great love, Marcus. I was just the next convenient chapter in your recycled script of deceit. The air crackled thick with the stench of exposed lies and shattered illusions. Marcus stammered, his eyes darting around the room as if seeking an escape route that didn't exist. Isabel had crumpled slightly, her hands covering her mouth, her shoulders shaking. The performance was in full swing, but the players were unmasked, their cheap costumes and carefully rehearsed lines falling away to reveal the ugly truth beneath. I felt a flicker of something grim, something akin to satisfaction, but it was quickly overshadowed by a profound weariness. The personal betrayal was laid bare for all to see, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that Marcus's deceptions ran deeper still. I glanced down at the navy folder clutched in my hand, its contents about to deliver the next, perhaps even more devastating blow. This was far from over. The air in the Crystal Swan ballroom was still thick with the stench of Marcus's exposed lies, Isabel's crumbling facade, a testament to the personal devastation I'd unleashed. He was stammering a broken record of pathetic half-denials, while she seemed to shrink into herself the glitter of her party dress, a mocking shroud. A grim satisfaction flickered within me, yes, but it was quickly overshadowed by a cold, hard resolve. The fight I knew was far from over. The personal betrayal was now hideously public, but Marcus's deceptions, his carefully constructed web of deceit, ran deeper, snaking their venomous tendrils into the very foundations of our shared life, our finances. I glanced down at the navy folder clutched in my hand, its weight a tangible reminder of the evidence I still held the contents about to deliver the next, perhaps even more crippling blow. Stepping towards the ornate buffet table now littered with abandoned canapes and Isabel's shattered champagne flute, I placed the folder down with deliberate precision. Its unassuming appearance belied the explosive truths contained within. My eyes found Marcus's again. He looked from the folder to my face, a new kind of fear, a more primal terror dawning in his eyes. This wasn't just about a broken heart anymore. Our retirement account, Marcus. Ha! I began, my voice still calm, almost unnervingly so. Each word was carefully chosen, a precisely aimed dart. The one we swore hand on heart not to touch until we were both 50. Remember those earnest discussions about our future, our golden years? A bitter laugh almost escaped me. Let's review. Shall we? January of last year, $5,000 withdrawn, vaguely labeled marketing advance. March, another $8,000 this time for internal travel. May saw $12,000 disappear under the guise of client development. And then by August, a straight $30,000 withdrawal. No description, no explanation. Just gone. Conveniently untraceable, or so you believed. Marcus swallowed hard, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple, tracing a path through the remnants of his stage makeup. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I continued, relentless. I hired a private auditor, Marcus, someone very thorough. They tracked every suspicious withdrawal over the past 18 months, and they found something rather illuminating. A little entity called Thorn Ventures Group. I let the name hang in the air. Registered in Delaware, of course. No tangible office, no staff, no discernible business activity whatsoever. Just a funnel, wasn't it, Marcus A., shell company designed to siphon over $142,000 from our future, from my future, into your personal slush fund. Isabel flinched as if struck, her head snapping up, her eyes wide with a new kind of panic. So she knew about this too. Of course she did. You use that money, our money, I pressed on, my gaze unwavering from Marcus, to fund this charade. Hotel bills for your romantic getaways with Isabel, lavish gifts, champagne-fueled weekends. And, speaking of lavish, I paused for effect. The deposit invoice for a luxury condominium at the Riverbend Lofts, valued at over $500,000. Do you know whose names are listed as co-owners on that deed? Marcus. I didn't wait for an answer he clearly couldn't give. Colin Marcus Thorne and Isabel Sienna Vance. Your personal email address is the contact her phone number for follow-up. Were you planning to move in right after the wedding? Or were you going to wait until I was officially and conveniently out of your life? I was going to surprise her with it. He stammered the lie, flimsy and pathetic, even to his own ears. But I didn't use any money from our account for that, not directly. Oh, Marcus, I said, a weary sigh escaping me. Didn't you think I'd find out about the second mortgage, the one you took out on our Cedar Haven home? The only significant property still legally under both our names, stripped of its equity, all for personal brand development. A brand, I might add, that I was never consulted about and which apparently only included your mistress and a portfolio of lies. From beside Liam Allister, Jacoby let out a short, derisive scoff. As a former forensic auditor, Mr. Thorne, he said, his voice dry as desert sand. I must say, your attempts to cover your financial tracks were amateurish. If your wife hadn't caught this, the IRS undoubtedly would have sooner rather than later. Marcus looked as though he might collapse. And just when the tension in the room seemed to reach its zenith, the ornate ballroom doors burst open again. This time it wasn't us. A tall, lean man in an impeccably tailored dark suit stepped in a leather briefcase, clutched negocios in his hand. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the stunned crowd, then landed squarely on Marcus, who had sagged against a nearby table, as if his legs could no longer support his weight. Am I on time? The newcomer asked, his voice low, clear, and resonant with an unmistakable authority. Marcus shot upright, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning dread. Julian Croft. What are you doing here? The man, Julian Croft. Marcus's longtime business partner at Innovate Digital Solutions, a man whose blunt demeanor had often intimidated even me, nodded curtly. Yes, Marcus, it's me. And I'm here because Innovate Digital Solutions is not your personal piggy bank. He glanced briefly at me, a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Alara, thank you for your anonymous tip and the preliminary evidence you provided. Without it, the executive team and I might still be in the dark about the true extent of his activities. You can't be serious, Julian. Marcus sputtered, his voice cracking. Oh, I'm deadly serious, Marcus. Julian snapped, his pleasantries vanishing. You've used company credit cards for a litany of personal expenses, hotels, first-class flights for 2 lavish gifts for Miss Vance here, even a completely fictitious internal training program that somehow cost the company nearly $92,000 in less than 8 months. Isabel slumped further into her chair, her face buried in her hands. I noticed her right hand instinctively go to her throat where a chain might lie. But there was nothing there now. Had she lost the locket in her earlier shock? Or had it, like so much else about her, never truly been hers to begin with? Julian continued, his voice unyielding. You thought being a co-founder granted you immunity, Marcus? You signed the company's code of conduct. You helped write the ethics charter with me, for God's sake. And then you systematically violated every principle within it. He fixed Isabel with a cold stare. And that includes our company's mandatory zero-tolerance policy on superior subordinate relationships, Miss Vance. A policy you also acknowledged in writing. Isabel looked up, her eyes wet and pleading. I didn't realize the policy was that strict. Strict, Julian cut her off. It's fundamental. He opened his briefcase and pulled out 2 cream-colored envelopes, placing them on the table with a decisive thud that echoed in the stunned silence. One, he said, indicating Marcus, is your termination letter for gross misconduct, effective immediately. The other, he turned to Isabel, is a notice of indefinite suspension for you, Miss Vance, pending a formal review. Both of you are barred from accessing any company asset systems, email accounts, and client lists as of this moment. Marcus staggered, his face ashen. You can't do this. I helped build that company from the ground up, which makes your betrayal of that trust all the more disgraceful, Marcus. Julian replied, his eyes like chips of ice. If we don't hold someone like you at your level accountable, then everything Innovate Digital Solutions stands for is meaningless. He paused, then looked at me one last time. Alara, my apologies for this intrusion on what is clearly a personal matter, but thank you for your courage. If you or your legal counsel require any internal financial reports for your divorce proceedings or any future litigation, my office will be happy to provide them. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Thank you, Julian. I really appreciate that. Julian Croft turned and walked out, leaving behind a silence so heavy, so absolute, it seemed to sweep away every last remaining mask, every lingering shred of denial. Marcus stood stripped, not just of his clothes, but of his job, his reputation, his carefully constructed illusion of success and integrity. Isabel was a broken figure, her dreams of a glamorous future in tatters. Liam, his face etched with a profound sorrow, slowly reached into his pocket, his eyes never leaving Isabel's tear-streaked face. The end of their story was about to be written. And I, Alara Thorne, watched it all, a profound weariness, settling deep into my bones, yet beneath it the first faint, tentative stirrings of liberation. The heavy silence left in Julian Croft's wake was a suffocating blanket over the garish remnants of Isabel's bachelorette party. Marcus stood a hollowed out caricature of the man I once knew, stripped bare of his job, his reputation, and every last one of his carefully constructed lies. Isabel Vance, no longer the triumphant bride to be, was a broken figure, her sobs muffled against her hands. The air was thick with the bitter taste of ruin. Liam, his face etched with a sorrow so profound it seemed to age him years in mere moments, slowly reached into his pocket. His movements were deliberate, each one weighted with the finality of a love irrevocably betrayed. He drew out the diamond engagement ring, the one that had sparkled with such promise on Isabel's finger, and placed it gently on the buffet table beside her shattered champagne glass and the damning company letters. The soft clink of metal against wood echoed through the silent room. "The wedding is off, Isabel." He stated, his voice quiet but unwavering, each word a nail in the coffin of their future. "I deserve better than this." It was a signal, it seemed, for the final act of the unraveling. One by one, Isabel's friends, the women who had moments before been cheering her on, began to quietly gather their purses and wraps. Their faces were a mixture of embarrassment, pity, and a desperate desire to flee the scene of such catastrophic social implosion. There were no words of comfort for Isabel, no rallying cries of support, just averted gazes and a swift, silent exodus as if afraid her disgrace might be contagious. Through the now open ballroom doors, I saw Alistair Jacoby speaking in low, grave tones to a bewildered-looking Pastor Chapman who had presumably been waiting nearby for a different kind of ceremony. The pastor's face fell as he listened, a slow nod of understanding signaling the official demise of yet another of Marcus and Isabel's elaborate deceptions. The church bells would not be ringing for them. Isabel's muffled sobs escalated into desperate, tearful pleas. "I was confused," she cried, her voice cracking, her words tumbling out in a torrent of self-pity. "I never planned for any of this to happen. It spiraled out of control." Her excuses, so flimsy and self-serving, fell on deaf ears. No one moved to comfort her. No one believed her anymore. The time for lies was long past. With a composure I hadn't known I possessed, I picked up the Navy folder containing the preliminary divorce petition I'd had my lawyer prepare. I walked over to where Marcus stood still, leaning against the table, his eyes vacant, his spirit seemingly elsewhere. I placed the documents firmly beside Liam's abandoned ring. "I don't need apologies, Marcus," I said, my voice clear and devoid of the tremor I felt deep inside. "I don't need explanations or more of your lies. I just need this to be over." Then I turned and walked away, head held high, not once looking back at the wreckage of my 12-year marriage. I could hear Marcus's desperate, choked call behind me. "Alara, wait. Please, we need to talk. Not like this." But his words were just empty sounds, a meaningless echo from a life I was already leaving behind. I kept walking through the suddenly deserted ballroom, past the pitying or curious glances of the hotel staff, and out into the cool night air. Each step a small victory, a reclamation of myself. The first faint tentative stirrings of liberation began to flutter in my chest, fragile as a newborn butterfly. 6 months later. The scent of pine and damp earth was the first thing I registered each morning, a world away from the cloying perfumes and sterile air of my old life in Cedar Haven. My small rustic cabin in Willow Creek, nestled deep in the heart of a sprawling forest, was my sanctuary. Here life was simpler, quieter. My days began not with the jarring alarm of a city apartment, but with the gentle insistence of birdsong and the ritual of hand-brewing strong black coffee, its aroma mingling with the fragrance of the surrounding wilderness. The divorce had been surprisingly swift. Marcus, overwhelmed by the public disgrace, the ongoing investigation at Innovate Digital Solutions, and the mountain of financial and legal battles now consuming him, had offered little resistance. His high-powered attorney had attempted a few blustering negotiation tactics, but my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman, had quickly disabused them of the notion that I was there to haggle or be intimidated. I wasn't chasing a vindictive win. I just wanted my life back, a clean break from the man who had so thoroughly betrayed me. And in the end, I got it. I kept my dignity and walked away with what was rightfully mine, leaving him to the wolves of his own making. I now worked part-time for a local nonprofit, the Phoenix Women's Network. It wasn't glamorous, no power suits or high-stakes KPIs, But every support group I facilitated, every quiet story shared by a woman learning to stand on her own 2 feet again, after navigating the treacherous waters of divorce or emotional abuse, made me feel like I was exactly where I needed to be. There was a profound satisfaction in helping others find their voice, their strength, a satisfaction that had been sorely missing from my previous gilded existence. Liam Jacoby and I still kept in touch. Ours was a quiet friendship forged in the crucible of shared trauma and a mutual understanding that few could comprehend. It wasn't romantic, not yet, perhaps never, but it was supportive, a gentle connection that asked for nothing and offered a quiet solace. Now and then, he'd drive up from the city, his goofy golden retriever buddy bounding out of the car to greet me with slobbery enthusiasm. We'd hike the trails around Willow Creek, share thermoses of coffee, and talk about everything and nothing. Everything that is, except the past. Not because we were consciously avoiding it, but because increasingly we no longer needed to. It was a scar, yes, but one that was slowly, surely beginning to fade. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, about a week after Liam's last visit, an unmarked plain brown envelope arrived with my mail. No return address. Inside, nestled between two stiff pieces of cardboard, was a stack of $100 bills, a significant amount of cash, enough to make my breath catch, and a single typed note as cryptic as it was unsettling. He had more secrets than even you knew. This was skimmed long before Thorn Ventures ever saw a dime. Consider it a partial refund. A friend. I stared at the note, then at the money, a cold shiver tracing its way down my spine, despite the warmth of the late afternoon sun. A friend who Julian Croft, with his access to corporate secrets, Clara Hayes exacting some form of belated justice, or perhaps even that mysterious, unreadable guest I'd seen filming the entire confrontation at the Crystal Swan Ballroom. What other secrets had Marcus held? The thought that my meticulously gathered evidence might only have scratched the surface of his duplicity was a deeply unsettling one. The antique locket with its strange symbol, a detail I'd almost forgotten, flickered briefly in my mind. Another unanswered question in a life that had once seemed so straightforward. This anonymous gift, this cryptic message, was a stark reminder that the past, no matter how firmly you try to close the door on it, sometimes has a way of seeping back in. I carefully folded the note and tucked it along with the cash into an old wooden box. For now, it was another puzzle, another unforeseen consequence in the long unraveling of Marcus Thorne. But as I looked out at the vibrant tapestry of fall colors painting the Willow Creek landscape, a sense of peace, hard won and precious, settled over me. The past might still hold shadows, but the present was mine and the future. The future was an open road. I carefully folded the cryptic note and tucked it along with the unexpected bundle of cash into an old wooden box that smelled faintly of cedar and forgotten things. The past, it seemed, wasn't entirely done with me, still sending out these strange, unsettling ripples. But as I looked out at the vibrant tapestry of fall colors painting the Willow Creek landscape, a landscape that was rapidly becoming home, I felt a sense of peace, hard won and precious, settle over me. For now, the scent of pine and the quiet promise of Liam's upcoming visit, apple pie definitely on the agenda, grounded me firmly in the present, a present I had fought with every fiber of my being to build. It's funny the things you think freedom means when you're trapped. I used to imagine it as a vast, empty space, an absence of burdens, a life carefree and untethered. But now, standing on the porch of my small cabin, the crisp autumn air filling my lungs, I understand it differently. True freedom isn't just about being unburdened. It's about no one else having the power to twist your image, your reality, to fit their self-serving narrative. It's the profound, unshakable knowing of who you are, independent of anyone else's definition. For so long, I had been the controlling wife, the woman who wasn't attractive anymore. The reason Marcus strayed. Or so his subtle manipulations, his gaslighting, his carefully constructed victimhood had tried to make me believe. What a heavy, suffocating cloak that had been to wear. But all of it, every last thread, was a cover story, someone else's pathetic excuse for their own guilt, their own profound moral failings. That cloak had been burned in the fires of that terrible night at the Crystal Swan Ballroom. Now I am simply Ilara. Ilara, a 37-year-old woman. Divorced, yes. No children. a path I hadn't chosen but now embraced with a quiet acceptance. Living alone but not lonely in a small wooden house that felt more like home than the grand, empty shell I'd shared with Marcus ever did. Each morning I brew coffee by hand, the ritual slow and deliberate, a mindful start to a day that is entirely my own to shape. Every evening I write a few lines in my journal, not to endlessly retell the past or pick at old wounds, but to make space for the future, to sketch out the contours of the unwritten chapters ahead. I no longer live to be seen, to be approved of, to fit into someone else's pre-designed mold. I live to feel, to experience, to simply be. The anonymous money, that strange postscript to Marcus's treachery, sits in its box. It's a puzzle, certainly a loose end that tugs occasionally at my curiosity, but it doesn't consume me. My focus, my heart, is increasingly drawn to my work with the Phoenix Women's Network. There, amidst the quiet courage of women piecing their own lives back together, I find a purpose, a quiet satisfaction that nourishes my soul in ways I never anticipated. Helping them find their strength, their voice, somehow reinforces my own. My phone buzzed on the small wooden table beside me, interrupting my thoughts. A new message. Heading up to Willow Creek this Saturday. Still owe me that apple pie, you know. And Buddy is demanding a rematch with those squirrels. Liam. A soft smile touched my lips. I typed back, only if you remember the vanilla ice cream this time, and tell Buddy the squirrels are ready for him. I set the phone down, a warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the wool cardigan I pulled a little closer around my shoulders. The weather was indeed turning colder, the first hint of winter whispering through the pines. But inside, deep within the core of my being, I no longer felt the chill of that past brutal season. The locket with its strange, unidentifiable symbol is now just a distant, faded memory. Its mystery remains unsolved, but somehow it's become unimportant, an irrelevant footnote in a much larger, more significant story. My story. The peace I found here, in the quiet solitude of Willow Creek, in the meaningful connections I'm forging, is far more compelling than any Anward riddle from a life I've left behind. I had walked through the storm, a tempest of betrayal and deceit that had threatened to tear me apart. And on the other side, bruised and battered, but not broken, I found myself. The storm had passed, and in its wake I found not ruins, but the cleared ground on which to build a life authentically, unapologetically mine.